Ahoy there, Lorcana fans! Welcome back to another episode of Local Lore, a podcast for Lorcana players who believe the best games happen in their own backyard. I'm Ian, and with me is my wonderful girlfriend, Lindsay.
Hi.
We've got a good episode for you today. We'll start off with a lore drop, just talking a little bit about what's going on in our local scene, a little bit about what we've been playing. We'll jump into a welcome wagon, where we'll talk about finding a community, and then we'll go into a coaching corner talking about deck building and where to start, the fundamentals of building a new deck well. But first, Lindsay, as always, I've got an icebreaker question here for you.
Yeah, I don't know what this is, so this is, you get on the fly, off the cuff.
It's nothing too intense, but it's something I'm interested in your quick, dirty, first reaction. What is your favorite ink color to play against?
Oh,
yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, think about, sometimes you can lose to a deck and you're like, oh, that wasn't any fun. Or there's certain ink colors that might irritate you more than others. What's an ink color you like to play against? Yeah.
It's funny because I think of all the ink colors, but then I think of what they're paired with. And so you're like,
part of it, yeah.
1 minute I like it, 1 minute I don't. I think competitively I like playing against the ink colors that don't have board wipes yet.
Okay.
Because I just think it makes the game a little bit more interesting. Obviously, so I would probably say amethyst.
Yeah.
It's probably my favorite color to play as well, but I think that it is, I think that it's really dynamic and agile and inherently very fair. And so I think that you have to play it smart to do it well. And so you don't have an eject button. So, I mean, I'll give B prep is it is a pretty fair board wipe because you're wiping your board as well. Versus stuff that, and not that I'm not saying that the board wipes are unfair, but I do, and they're very healthy in the meta, because there are certain decks that can just run away with you. But I think amethyst is my favorite. It's one of the most dynamic kind of supporting colors. So final answer, amethyst it is.
I think amethyst for me as well. I think it took me a while to come up with this. I thought amber for a while.
Ruby's your color.
Ruby's my favorite color to play. But my favorite color to play against.
Yeah.
Right. And I think the thing there is that, you're right. Some of my favorite games have been amethyst. I play a lot of amethyst in tournaments. I've only played a handful not with amethyst in some way, shape, or form. And I think that my favorite matchups that I remember are amethyst mirror matches where there's a lot of back and forth. Amethyst doesn't have direct targeted removal. They don't have, big board wipes like you mentioned. You have to pair with Ruby Amethyst. But they also have enough card draw where both players typically have answers and have counterplay to whatever questions you ask of your opponent. And then I also think that there's some fun doing the okay, I've got a genie and I know your Elsa's going to come out. Do I tap my genie or, whatever? Your Elsa's going to come down and interact with my board. Maybe I push some damage back over to finish the Elsa off with my Belle. Or, I've got the Peter Pan and now my evasives have rush. Because it doesn't have, a lot of from hand disruption or banishing and things like that. It makes up for it with it is the color that has the most board focused abilities. Rush, exerting things on board, taking challenges, bouncing things back to hand. It's just the color that does the most.
Package definitely is part of the reason why. I feel like some of the coolest plays I've both had or seen by other opponents. You're and when somebody has some crazy move where they're bouncing crabs and that you're watching this happen, you're just you can't be mad that it happened to you.
Right.
You can just be impressed by somebody's.
It's also just the game at its core is a board focused game, and this is the colors that actually that's the color that plays the most hard into the board. So I think that that's probably my favorite color to play against, and it's one of my favorite colors to play. It's certainly, if anything, I think it's a bit of a safety net kind of a color where if you if you play an Amethyst deck, you know that at the very least you're going to see enough cards to have a chance at any game that you play.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's okay. I was interested to see if maybe you had some differing opinions. I thought about
funny.
Amber because Amber
came up in my mind too.
feels fair.
And then there was a few cards in Amber that I was like, I find to be very frustrating to play against.
Well, I actually didn't have any problems with anything in Amber. It was more that like if I don't.
It's what it pairs with.
No. It's more that I think with Amber, like Amber steals can be annoying, right? But that's more the steal part of it than the Amber part of it.
See, what's funny is steel was my other color because I think steel by itself is an inherently very fair color.
I don't know. I mean, I think I just don't. I think about Emerald Steel and Amber Steel. It just creates some really unfun experiences because it's got all that early singable removal.
Right.
So I think that but Amber in and of itself, I look at it's just that it's almost always aggro or mid-range. There's and it tends to be more like, don't mess with me, I've got too much stats or whatever. It's not a lot of back and forth. It's more like I'm sitting there and removing your stuff in the case of Amber Steel. And then I'm going. And then I'm just questing. I'm not doing a lot of back and forth always. So anyways, I thought about Amber, but I think I had to land on I think my least favorite to play against is probably Emerald.
That was the first one that came to mind. The hard part is there's so many mechanics in Emerald that I think are really cool. Yes. The bouncing things back to
playing
people's
Emerald.
hands.
I'm a hypocrite. Right? I like playing Ruby and Emerald.
I think it's the discard. And I think discard is, I took discard to a tournament.
I have
and
too.
It's I think that it's just really frustrating to play against. And so I think, but
well, let's go ahead
it's
then.
Not Ruby, so.
Well, no, see, I love Ruby. I love Ruby. Let's go ahead and jump into the lore drop. So you missed out on League last week.
I did. Sad day. I've not played a whole lot of Lorcana this week at all.
No, you have been playing. You've been playing the Lorcanito.
Yeah,
and
I switched up my decks on Lorcan. I mean, I just switched up the builds. I'm always playing Blurple.
It's always Blurple.
It's always Blurple in some fashion.
Yeah.
So
it was fun to see though that the change up in your deck and how you're sort of attacking different matchups differently.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm not sure I found my flow yet with the newer builds. I'm back on, no one drops besides Bell.
Right.
Kind
Monstros,
of the more
lots of Monstros.
Lots of Monstros. I love that card. I'm obsessed with that card.
Yeah.
But I've just been playing a little bit on Lorcanito here and there. Not a whole lot other than that.
Well, I ran League, and there was an even number of players, so I sat out, and I didn't get to play much this week. At the event because the rounds seemed to everybody seemed to end at about the same time. So I really wasn't able to jump in and get games with people whose rounds ended quickly. However, I was able to stay late. I
was convinced you weren't coming home.
Yeah, it was a long night. But Sean, actually the owner of the store that we play at Unplugged Games Cafe, Sean stayed late and we just tested some newer experimental builds that we were really excited about.
Yeah.
And so getting to really try some of those was super fun, especially focusing on a few different flavors of Amber Sapphire, which has for a long time been considered the worst color combination, or at least one of the worst color combinations. So we had a lot of fun messing with that. And I've talked about this a few times on the podcast now. I am championing this so hard, probably too hard, but boy is Alice mid-range fun.
Oh yeah.
And it has been performing really, really well into a few meta matchups, which is a pretty exciting thing to say. So at some point I'll probably do a little deck profile of that. I'll waste everyone's time showing that off because I'm super proud of it. It's been something I've been working on since set 2, and so much of it's going to rotate, which is a big bummer, But yeah, that's pretty cool.
It'll be your sleeper deck in Infinity format.
Yeah, for sure. And I think this is going to be the deck. I for a while I was going to bling out Ruby Amethyst.
Yeah.
I think this is the deck I'm going to bling out fully, to pay true, homage to this archetype, which I've played so much, so much of it across the history of Lorcana so far. But some new other things. The Ravensburger Play Hub has officially launched. So far, it seems it only supports best of 3. They're doing a lot of stress testing. This is the early stage 1.
Yeah.
So we were hoping to get that set up, but we had some issues getting the store account linked, so we're waiting for it to process. So I just received that news right before we started recording. I was going to, hopefully we'll be able to report back in the next couple weeks how that goes, but I think we'll be back to using Melee for this week. But it was very easy, very, very easy to get set up as a player. I already messed around with that. It's very minimal tools, but it's quite easy to jump in, make a little username and an account for yourself. And then you can see listings of all of the other stores in the area that have signed up as a store account and are posting, and you can post your events that are upcoming in there. It's pretty nice, and I'm excited to see where they go with it. I think it will prove to be a pretty handy tool for the future. I'm sure there's plenty of fine-tuning they're going to need to do, but I'm really optimistic about it, and I think it's going to make it easy as a tournament organizer, which is going to help me out a ton come set championship season. So
I haven't fiddled with it too much, so I have to spend some time with it.
So some other news, which we're sort of bleeding into this, lore drop segment, but Worlds.
This is pretty big news.
Yeah, Worlds. Not this weekend, but next weekend. Not
next week, right? It's coming though. All of a sudden.
I know. And we're super excited for it. And this is us kind of giving you a PSA. We're going to be doing an entire episode about Worlds. So talking about the formats, making predictions. So we're going to be predicting who we think is going to win.
Right.
What decks we think are going to perform well. Key cards that we hope to, or we expect to see, popping up a lot. We'll come up with a fun way to gamify it so that someone gets the winner and the loser, because, I have to make everything a competition.
Typical. Well, and I think just in general, to newer players who aren't used to watching. So the secret in our house is we watch tournaments streamed all the time, whether it's Pokemon or other tournaments that are streamed. So we're thrilled to watch this one. But I think it's I don't play Pokemon, but I feel like I can watch a stream and I have a better understanding of how to play the game because of watching it. And so it's a great time for new players to really just spend some time getting to watch the game played.
At the highest level.
At the highest level. So, it gets you an idea of kind of what decks are in the meta. So it gives you language around the card game. I know early on when Lorcana started, we would watch, content creators stream their play. It's another great way to learn. So I think, definitely. Plus, it's always, I'm sure Ravensburger will have exciting news that they'll announce. So, we'll definitely be watching it. So you should too.
And so that'll be Saturday and Sunday, not this weekend, but next weekend. And you'll be able to watch that stream on Twitch. I believe the coverage starts at 8 a.m. and I believe the first round started at 9 a.m. Eastern time. Definitely check that out. If you, are a newer or casual player and you're looking to improve, if you have time on that Saturday and Sunday, I promise you, as a lifelong card game player, watching competitive play will make you a better player. You'll be sitting there watching and you'll see a player make a play that seems unusual to you, and it'll trigger in your mind, wow, that's weird. I wasn't going to do that. Why did they do that? And you can start working backwards, and hopefully if the casters are on top of it, they'll point that out and be like, hey, this is why they made that play. They didn't quest here because they're anticipating a specific answer from their opponent. Maybe it's a rush character that they are like, wow, they don't want to feed this character into a fox play. So, okay, let's, that was a really heads up, unintuitive play, and it starts to make you more aware of those situations, and you'll start spotting those in your games at League. So, cool opportunity. So more on that next week. We're going to do the entire episode themed around it and just have a ton of fun hyping up the event, and I can't wait.
I'm pretty excited.
Well, let's go ahead and shift into our Welcome Wagon segment. This is a segment led by Lindsay, where she kind of takes on a few topics for the newer players that are trying to find their way, find their start in community with other players.
So this section's all about finding your local game store. And hopefully where you are, you have the option of multiple game stores. I know that, that's a privilege we certainly have in Richmond and in bigger cities, that we have a very healthy scene. There's a lot of different stores to choose from, a lot of different vibes.
And it is more prevalent than it used to be growing up.
Yeah.
I mean, myself, growing up as a kid, going to game stores, I mean, I go back to my hometown and I'm startled by how many more stores there are supporting, card games and board games and stuff than there used to be. So hopefully there's options in your area.
Yeah, so I think if you're new to the game, the best place to start is Google. I mean, let me Google that for you. The first place is probably look in your area for game stores or card stores. And then if they have social media or they have a website, I would look at that, see if they offer a local league, check it out, drive by, kind of check on the vibe. I know, and then obviously if not, you can call them and ask if they have a Lorcana league. Typically if they sell Lorcana product, they usually have a league. At least that's what we've seen so far. But you can also find out Melee or the Ravensburger Hub has a great search feature for stores that are hosting tournaments. So
and
that's
it'll
going to
only
be a great...
get built out more as
Exactly.
it becomes more proliferated.
Yeah. But I think that if you have the option of multiple stores, not all local scenes are made equal. There are different vibes. I know we talked about this. We touched this a little bit last time because our store just changed up the way that we were doing league. So we had a league that was open play, which is common. Some stores will do just kind of like an open play where you either pay to join, you get a pack and you get to play. Maybe they just devote a couple of tables on a Saturday night for you to play. But other stores do a little bit more constructed. So we've switched to having paired rounds using Melee, and it's 3 rounds. So, you pay a little bit to get in, and then you win a pack you get a pack per win. I know it's funny, somebody was just talking about this so in Richmond, we have a Discord channel. It's a great thing to check out. Maybe once you find your store, find some people you can ask about what other resources they have. So we have a Discord server that's all about what's happening kind of in the local scene. There's a channel for events. There's a channel just for general conversations. But somebody was just recently talking about the breakdown of all of our leagues. So we've got one that's just totally open play. And then there's one that doesn't charge you anything, but at the end of the set, so they do paired matches, I think, during the league. And then at the end of kind of the set, they do a top 8 tournament. And so the person who wins the tournament wins some prizing. So there's just a bunch of different kind of setups. So what you think is going to work for you, if you need practice for something that's a little bit more competitive, a little bit more serious, like a tournament setup, or if you're really just looking for super casual league. You just want to go and you want to hang out with some friends and play a couple matches and you want to play a couple different decks. So maybe you look into something like that. The other thing is the atmosphere and the inclusivity and the vibe there. I think for me, it was a big adjustment to the different types of people at different stores. There are some stores that are going to be a little sweatier, where the players are going to be a little bit more intense. They might not be as welcoming. They could be there to... Their whole goal in being there is to grind out some matches to train for a more competitive scene. Or maybe they're there because they're really competitive and they're there for the prize support. They're trying to get the packs at the end of it. So there's just, you might have one store that has a little bit more of an intense atmosphere. And so versus one that's maybe a little bit more friendly, a little bit more open play. Our store had the reputation of being kind of the family-friendly store. So we got a lot of new families. We had a lot of new players that came in because we were there to teach new players how the game works. Because like I said, we play at a board game cafe, so they've got staff that even know how to play the game that can help teach. So I think that that's really helpful. If you're really kind of uncertain or worried about your first time going to a league, like consider dropping by the store kind of in the middle of the day or even in the middle of a league night. I know in my personal experience, so when Ian and I first started playing, Ian had already been going to a league before I ever picked it up. So it was kind of nice because I could vibe check on how the league was for him. But there was a league near my house on my side of town that was every Saturday nights. And so the first time I really wanted to go, I was like really nervous because I had only ever been to our league. It was very casual. And I didn't have my safety net of Ian, who was self-assured and confident. And so I literally like met a friend near the store. And so I walked in and I like had my backpack with me and I was like, I know I'm kind of late for the start of league. Like, could I play? And they were like, we actually do like paired matches. And so you'd miss a whole round or like maybe I'd even missed 2. And so it was great because then the next time that I was like, okay, the vibe seems cool. The people seem cool. And I was like, well, now I just know that I need to arrive on time. So.
Yeah. And on that note, I think, for some players, and I think people who have a background in trading card games or competitive, games, I think it'll be an easier sell to just drop in, figure it out, and go if that's something that you have experience with. But for people that are newer to card games in general, for people that are, maybe this is their first sort of foray into going into a shop like this, going into a card store, for people that are bringing their kids in, right, with them, and their kids interested, and hey, I want to, and we see this truly all the time, the dads or moms that are like, oh, my 9-year-old really wants to try this out. They got some packs from their grandparents and now they want to learn the game or they want to play. We see this all the time. And so, it's important, in my opinion, for leagues to be considerate of these different types of players, but not everyone is. And I'll say this too, and I think we are blessed in our area of having some really great stores that are really well run with friendly owners. But in my long experience, not every local game store is made equal. You know what I mean? Like many of ours are catering to a modern, diverse, family-friendly audience, right? They're clean, they're organized, friendly staff that are helpful and know what they're talking about, right? But there's also plenty out there that come from a less civilized age, the age that I grew up in, going to these stores, right? Where they are dingy, you've got somebody sitting up front that doesn't really want to work or sell or answer questions, right? They're there because they're there because they're nerds, right? And so, that's not, I can go into those places because I grew up in them and feel totally comfortable, but that's not the case for everybody. And you shouldn't force yourself to go into those if there's another option that, you would feel more comfortable in. And, and sometimes those are also the stores, in my experience, and again, there's exceptions to every single rule, but those are also the stores that tend to attract the people from the less civilized age that are a little bit more, exclusionary and aren't quite as family friendly. You'll hear a lot more profanity flying around left and right than you will at other places. So it's okay. It's okay to pass on a store because it doesn't align with, your interests in the game. If people that are way too sweaty and they're only there for the prizes and they're not there to help you pick up the game and learn, just pass on them. Find a place that is your speed. And that means that maybe when you do pick up and you become a great player and you're ready to test yourself, further, maybe you can return to that more competitive store and you'll fit right in and it'll make sense that you can kind of, gel with that group. And we've seen, with our store being more, or at least originally more of the family-friendly, this is the place for new players to learn store. We've seen people come to our store, be at open play, get some cards, learn the game, and then kind of graduate and go to more formal leagues where they have more prize support. You have to play competitive players and paired rounds and everything. And so, I think that's okay. And it's okay to find the community that makes sense for where you are in your Lorcana journey.
Yeah, for sure. The other thing is, if you don't have a great support system in your local area, you only have one store option.
Yeah.
There's a lot of really great online communities as well. So I know that certain content creators have created Discord channels for talking about play, being able to play, you know, like we said on Lorcanito or Pixelborn, you're able to like plan to play against other people. And so like, I think I've talked about JDR in every single podcast, but like he has it's a pay to join the Discord channel, and it's a testing group that he talks specifically, you know, about the decks that he's building. So if you're a Blurple player, or I think he's an Amethyst Steel player too. So if those are two color combinations you're a big fan of, like that might be something to check out. But explore, you know, there's plenty of content creators out there. So
yeah, there is, and that can be really good, even if you don't have an opportunity. Maybe you live out in a rural area. Yeah, like you can still enjoy the game, discuss the game, share deck lists, share ideas, and have some sense of community there. The other thing is some areas will have like local, like Facebook groups, like meetup groups for the game. Even
Such
if there's
a millennial, I forgot about Facebook.
I know. I'm constantly being forced to stay on Facebook because of all of these kinds of groups that I have to be a part of.
Actually, the only content I get on Facebook to look at is Lorcana content.
Yeah, but like you'll still find like, hey, this is the local town or local region Lorcana group, and maybe there's no store that officially supports it, but maybe you're meeting up at a brewery or something like that to play. That can be a really good resource too if you're in a sort of a what I call a game desert, and you're looking for where to even find product. Sometimes do some searching on social platforms and seeing if there's any communities or groups that are other players that likewise don't have a home in a friendly local game store, but instead maybe you can do some networking on those and find a good opportunity to get some people to meet up and play. Yeah,
for sure.
Pretty cool.
Well, I think that covers finding your local game store or finding your local Lorcana community. Let's pivot over to our coaching corner. So we are back on deck building because it is not a one podcast subject.
Certainly not.
To say the least. So we've previously talked about the different types, the different styles of decks. And so now we're getting to deck building 101, how to build a deck. I'm curious because I'm terrible at building decks. So,
I think...
tell us your secrets.
I think it kind of starts with like some fundamentals, and that's kind of the goal of today's coaching corner, is looking at the fundamentals. Before getting into that, it's kind of important to know what your goal is before you start, right? So if you're building a deck, you can be building a deck for a bunch of different reasons. You could be building a deck just because you're excited about a specific interaction. You could be building a deck to take, to Worlds. If you're a Worlds player, well, what deck am I going to build to do that, right? And so...
Sorry if you're headed to Worlds, you figured out deck building.
Probably.
But you never know.
Well, and I actually think that this is my hot take, which is that not all competitive players are innovative deck builders. There's a lot of people that could just pick up a list and play it.
Absolutely. There is a difference between being good at playing the game and building decks. And like, I think building decks is an art form. And like, I can fine tune a deck. Like I can pick up a list and I can play it and see what's not working. But like, if you give me like blank slate, I'm like, okay.
It can be overwhelming. I think it can be overwhelming to look at all of the card options and be like, well, what the heck do I do, right? But there are a few things that are going to help you actually build your deck in a cohesive manner. And then following those sort of fundamentals, you'll be able to slowly improve and adapt as you learn more about it. One of the key things about deck building is you're not going to get it right on the first try. You're going to need to do some testing to determine if it's worth continuing to play with, and if it needs improvement, where can you find those improvements, right? But let's just go ahead and start off. When you're building a deck, you obviously identify what your goal is and be realistic about it. If you're saying this is the deck I'm going to play for set championships, maybe you need to be a little bit more stringent about it. If you're saying this is a fun deck I want to take to league night and just play around with and have a good time, I have 3 decks here, none of which I would take to set championship, but all of which are original creations that I made that nobody else has made that I've ever seen. And they are good enough to take to league and win a few games and play. They can hang with the top dogs. They just probably can't beat them, enough to win a tournament, right? Yeah. And so I have...
all beautifully sleeved and art sleeves as well.
That's true, yes. You can
they
see
all have matching
in case you're wondering,
sleeves.
Scar is my all-time favorite Disney character. And you can see I've got the sleeves in the art boxes and everything. We've got the Ursula as well. Okay.
Sorry.
Back on topic. There are a few different starting points. First thing you can do, obviously, is augment an existing deck archetype. This is most common when you have new cards entering the format in the form of new sets. I'm going to sort of skip past this one because I think this is an important skill to have, but I think that it's one that is a little bit more obvious. You start with a deck that is generally established to be good, and you try out new cards in place of other cards in the list. So if you have a new 2-drop, you take an old 2-drop out to try the new 2-drop, right? But I think the more common thing, and the thing that I've always kind of started with these decks is, identifying a powerful interaction or a unique combo. And so that could take the form of, for instance, Ursula, Deceiver of All, and We Know the Way, which is a 3-cost song that lets you shuffle a card from your discard pile back into your deck and then flip the top card of your deck. And if it's the same name as the card that was shuffled, you can play it for free. Well, when there's 6 different cards named Ursula in 2 colors. That's 24 copies of Ursula that can be included in a deck for a better than 33% chance to flip it off of We Know the Way. And when you can sing it twice with Deceiver Ursula, you can see where I'm going.
Double your odds.
So that was the origination of the deck. I'm like, wow, that's a cool combination. Let me see what I can do with it. But obviously it goes beyond that. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about. The other thing you can do is just lean into synergy. There's intentional synergy. These are like themed packages that the developers obviously want you to use. Like
a lot of the Duel Links.
Actually the Duel Links are a perfect example of this. They're often funneling you into a specific synergy, right? So puppies, racers, all of that good stuff. And then you have unintentional synergy. This is a little bit harder to cleanly define, but this would be cards from different ink colors, themes, sets, etc., but that unintentionally complement each other. So the example I give to people is Amber's Rapunzel, right? Gifted with healing. That's a very powerful card. It naturally synergizes with cards that have high health pools and absorb damage. So it naturally synergizes with things like Teeth and Ambitions, which you can sing, damage your own card. But then Rapunzel, in a completely different color, can come in and heal that damage. It naturally synergizes with things like Mr. Smee, which damages himself every round, right? If he's damaged himself once or twice, you can bring out the Rapunzel, heal it all up. So I think that is a really good example of unintentional synergy, which is something you can build a deck around. So you have these starting points, and I think that this is just going to give you a little bit of a North Star of something that is powerful enough or synergistic enough to lean into. But the most important thing, and this is the thing that I see new Lorcana players mess up more than anything when it comes to deck building, is they don't actually define a win condition. Now, we talked about archetypes 2 episodes ago. So, you can go and check out episode 3 if you're curious to understand what makes aggro, control, mid-range, and combo, and how they like to play. But each of them, separate from the idea of how fast or slow they want to win the game, they do need win conditions. And that has to do with the specific cards that you're playing. So common examples of this is you can take a slow control deck like Ruby Amethyst, and you can say, how is this deck wanting to win the game? Well, they're building their hand up, and then they're wiping their board, the opponent's board, with Be Prepared, and then reestablishing threats after that once the opponent has run out of resources. They're trying to grind their opponent out of cards so that they can then reset the game while they have more ink and more cards than anybody else, and then win from there, right? So that is an example of a win condition that's very grindy. It's an attrition-based win condition, and they have the tools to do it. But then you look at a deck like Ruby Sapphire. That deck is also controlling. It's also playing Be Prepared, but instead of wiping the board and then like assembling a huge hand, what they're trying to do is slow the opponent down, and if that means wiping the board, great, but they're trying to get their big Tamatoas out with a bunch of items and quest, for 6 or 7 and use the lucky dime and really win the game in 2 or 3 turns after pivoting that board state, right?
Yeah.
After flipping the board state, right? So win conditions are important, and win conditions are pretty, I think, there's a lot of ways you can win.
Yeah.
You can win by playing things that have huge questing numbers, and you just say, hey, I'm playing a mid-range archetype.
Yep.
That's a deck that is going to control the aggro decks and aggro the control decks, right? And you might say, well, the way I win against aggro is removing all of their stuff and playing these big questers that can close the game while also controlling the board.
Yeah.
But then the flip side is, okay, but against control, I'm not going to get to those guys quite so much. Maybe I have some middle turn cards that have, thicker bodies, higher questing that I can, push the pace with, and I'm going to draw cards in case they board wipe me. I'll be able to replay. So win conditions are nebulous in that you can do them a bunch of different ways. Sometimes it's a combo finish, sometimes it's just good characters with good questing bodies, but eventually you have to win the game somehow.
Yeah.
Right? And you need to have a clear idea of in your mind, okay, if I'm playing Amber Emerald discard, I've discarded their hand, I've played Under the Sea to wipe their board with Kita. How am I winning? By once I've accomplished those 2 goals, I'm turning everything to the right. Even my Prince Johns, even my Cinderellas. It's all going to the right. I'm questing it all in. I'm trying to win in like 3 turns of questing.
Yep.
It's worth saying, it might seem obvious, but if you don't have that idea in mind, then when you're actually playing the deck, you're not really going to know how to close the games, even if you do accomplish the combos that you set out to do.
And I think it's an important thing to keep in mind too when you start even a 2-needed deck. Because it's like all of a sudden you're like, oh, I can like take one, I can switch 1 for 1 here, and then it's like now you've kind of changed your win condition. So it's kind of like the North Star of guiding you as you build the deck.
You might have started with the idea of, I really want to play this, Ursula, We Know the Way combo to cheat out a bunch of Ursulas, but how am I winning? Well, I'm winning by slamming 7-drop Ursulas, both of them, that quest for 3 and have big bodies, and then I'm protecting them while I do that with rush units that can clear things, with effects that can freeze opponents and stop them from readying, and that's how I'm trying to win the game. Right. Now, it's not saying it always works, but I have that North Star, to your point, in mind as how I'm going to try to close games out. So, that is an important thing to remember. And then from there, you have your win condition. You need to build a game plan, not just a pile of cards, right? And so you have to ask yourself, okay, what's my win condition? Because oftentimes people start with their win condition in mind. Okay, my win condition is Tamatoa. I want to get a bunch of items and quest the Tamatoa. Okay, well, what game speed best fits that? Well, Tamatoa is an 8-drop. And you need to be able to play enough items out for him to be good. If you just play Tamatoa and you don't have any items, he's not going to do anything, right? So, okay, you're going to naturally need time to build your item reservoir up so that when you play the Tamatoa, he actually has an impact. So you need the time. You should be playing a slower game plan. That means that if you play that slower game plan, you need things to support that slower game plan. You need the ability to control your opponent, stop them from winning before you can get all your items out and your Tamatoa. You need to protect your items and resources and your hand from being discarded. You need to invest in thinking through, what are the cards that I need to put my win condition in the best place to reliably see the board and see play. So you have to also look at your typical curve. You say, I would love for my turns to go like this. This is a really useful tool when you're deck building. If you go and you say, here's what I want to see on every turn in a perfect world. On turn 1, I'm going to play Cinderella. On turn 2, I'm going to play Mr. Smee and I'm going to sing a removal song. I'm going to sing Strength or Storm with Cinderella. Right. Wow, that's amazing. And then on turn 3, I'm going to play Pete so that nobody can mess with my stuff. Or I'm going to play Ariel and go find another song. Either option is great. Mm-hmm. And then on turn 4, I'm going to play Prince Naveen and sing A Whole New World and refill my hand. If you say, okay, that is my perfect, ideal curve, then you have a game plan. You know what you're doing. You know what you're trying to do every single game.
Right.
It may not always work out that way, but you have a plan. And from that point, step 4, so to speak, on my list here, is all about making it consistent.
Yeah.
You have your game win condition. You have your game plan. Now you just need to make it consistent. Mm-hmm. And consistency is sort of another big term that, like, I think a lot of things feed into. So a lot of people think consistency is just card draw, but that's not true. Card draw is a form of consistency. You'll see more of your deck. That means you'll see more of the cards you need to win. You'll see more options to respond to what your opponent's doing. But actually, card draw is a form of a larger thing called resource extension. This is commonly used in other card games as a term, but the concept here is if you view your hand and the cards on the field as a +1 or -1 number, right? Like how many cards have been in play or in your hand or in your inkwell at any point in time. Resource extension is simply, how do I add to that? How do I extend my resources and stretch them further? So that can be things like playing something like a Great Stone Dragon, right? A Great Stone Dragon is going to be continually feeding more cards into your inkwell, meaning you don't have to ink cards from your hand.
Right.
Thus, you retain options in your hand and you don't have to worry so much about inking because you have Great Stone Dragon basically reusing cards. Another form of resource extension is simply pulling cards from the discard pile back to your hand.
Yeah.
You know, the Racers deck that we talked about last week. I
played one on Lorcana.
Right, the ultra budget, Racers deck that I kind of showed off. Check that out if you're interested. It's a $16 glorified theme deck, but it actually can win games. I don't think it's going to go win worlds or anything.
I think I played like your build, like that list on Lorcanito, because I was like, I kept waiting for, you know, different cards and like kind of expecting some of the, like, because you're like, it's Lorcanito. There's not like, it doesn't have to be the cards that you have. And it was like, it was exactly the Racer deck. So it was fun.
Yeah, and it's a cool deck, but that deck doesn't draw a lot of cards, but it's creating hand advantage by pulling cards back from the discard pile. So it might not be a new card from your deck, but it's still a card re-entering your hand, giving you more resources and options. So resource extension is a really big thing, right? That's why you'll see in blue decks, it's been around for forever, but Grammatala, the 4-drop Grammatala that you look at the top 2 cards, put one in hand, one on the bottom, it's a simple, kind of boring card. An effect, it's not broken, doesn't do much, but just the simple amount of consistency that it generates, because you're not just drawing a card, you're looking at 2 cards and picking the one that's preferable to your strategy. So it's still a +1 to your hand, but it's a higher quality +1 more often than not. And then you have to look at things like redundancy. And this is a word that people confuse a lot. But redundancy is something that is, I think, essential to most decks, but especially aggressive and mid-range decks. If you're building a deck where you really want something to happen every single time, let's say you're playing your Blurple deck, what do you want to do on turn 2 every single time?
Ramp.
You want to ramp. Well, you might look at Tipo and say, Tipo is amazing. Of course I'm playing Tipo. But then you say, well, Tipo isn't enough. I have to ramp on turn 2. What do I need to do to make sure that happens? I can't play more copies than Tipo. I can't play more than 4 copies of Tipo, right? Well, that's where Sail the Azurite Sea comes in, because that is a completely different card. It's an action. It you draw another card and then you can ink, but a second time that turn, but it has to be an inkable card. So it's different in a lot of ways, but it achieves the same goal at the same time of the game.
Right.
So redundancy is all about finding the most important things for your game plan that have to happen and finding other cards that might not be ideal, but that can play and fill that role in a suboptimal scenario. So for the longest time, we saw in Steel Song, we would see cards like Ariel being the primary card in that slot. You always want to see Ariel on 3. And why is that? Because not only because it gets you the song, that's amazing, but because it's a singer 5 and it can sing a whole new world or Along Came Zeus the following turn. Right? So what were people doing in sort of the sets 3 through 5? They were putting 2 extra copies of Gaston.
Oh, yeah.
Why? It's a singer 5.
Right.
Now, it's not as good as Ariel. It doesn't get to look for an extra song, right? But it fills that important niche of getting some singer down that can then get your whole new world to go off, right? So looking for those sorts of curve filler cards, right? You know what you want to achieve on a given turn, and then you look for cards similar to it that fill that role, and that will give you redundancy. Now, you don't always want redundancy. Sometimes you have a card that's a little bit more of a niche effect. You want it sometimes, but not all the time. And then you can go into sort of a toolbox, approach. But purely for consistency, if you know that this core, concept is essential to your strategy, it's really important to look for other cards that fill that role, even if they're not as good. I think another thing for consistency that's important to talk about, and this is obvious, you'll hear a lot of people talk about that, is your inkable versus uninkable count. There are some general best practices, right? If the faster your deck wants to play, like the more aggro your deck is, the more uninkables you can run, because you don't need to ink as high, and you will often have multiple options of your 1 through 3 cost cards. So as long as you can ink up to like 3 or 4, you will often be able to always be making new plays, right? But the higher and the slower the game plan that you want to play, typically the lower your inkable count needs to be.
Right.
I believe your blurple decks are very often like 10 uninkables, 10 or 11.
Like 10 to 12. I mean, and 12 is even too high.
That's been the sweet spot, right? And that's something because the last thing you want to do is to be sitting there at turn 6 and you have a Hades in your hand and you really want to get that Hades off. You need to remove that Maui shark, but you don't have another inkable card to put into your inkwell. So finding that balance of, okay, the longer my deck wants to play the game, the fewer inkable cards the fewer uninkable cards I should be playing. Now, that's a general rule of thumb. There are exceptions to that rule. We can see like Ruby Sapphire decks that used to run Fishbone Quills. Those would often run slightly higher uninkable counts because the quill can ink an uninkable. And so there is exceptions to these rules, but those are typically based on the cards at play, not so much the general best practices of looking at archetypes. So that's a component of consistency that a lot of people don't get right away, because inking as a form of playing resources is a unique thing to Lorcana. And I think all of this, I think there's one other thing, which is if your deck is trying to do a specific thing, like protecting your key, like your win conditions is kind of an important thing as well for consistency in your game plan. This is not how it's generally viewed, but like there are certain components of like, I know I'm going to need this card every single time and I need it to not be messed with. Then part of what you need to be doing is saying, how can I make my card as bulletproof as possible if it's essential to my win condition? And we'll talk about that right at the end there. The last sort of major fundamental that I would like everybody when you're building decks to think about is removal and disruption. And I think that we can see throughout the history of Lorcana's top competitive decks, with the exception of the absolute fastest decks in the game, the hyper aggro lists that are only trying to go to 20 as fast as possible, and if they get stalled out even once, they just roll over and die. I think we can see that every deck wants at least some form of removal or disruption. So what is removal? It's basically what it says.
Yeah.
You're picking cards off of your opponent's board and putting them somewhere else. I mean, really, that's the most dumbed down form of it. It comes in a lot of different forms in Lorcana. So there's direct banishment effects like, Madame Medusa's Be Prepared. You see a lot of it in Ruby. Things like Brawl is a direct banishment. It doesn't matter what their stats are as long as it has 2 attack or less. It doesn't matter how much defense they have or what keywords they have or whatever. You can banish it. Then there's dealing damage. You see a lot of that in Steel, right? So you see the removal songs in the form of Along Came Zeus and Strength of a Raging Fire and whatnot. And you're dealing damage from hand, like from effects, right? You can ink enemy stuff. You're very familiar.
Yeah, with Hades or Into the Unknown or Let It Go. So taking a character and removing it from play and adding it to the inkwell.
Yeah, and that's one that comes with some pros and cons, right? It tends to not care so much about their stats, but it does give them extra resources.
It does,
so there's some pros and cons there. Emerald has a lot of what we call bouncing effects. It returns cards back to the opponent's hand. Now, it doesn't get rid of them for the whole game, right? But it does temporarily remove them.
Yeah, it changes the tempo.
It absolutely does. We see a lot of purple amethyst cards have removal in the form of rush characters or characters that exert unexerted characters so that your characters can challenge.
Yeah.
That is something that another component of your Blurple deck that is really important is, you look at Amethyst, you say, oh, Amethyst doesn't have removal. Well, as long as you have characters on board, it does. You can play that Elsa, tap somebody down, and now you can deal with them through challenging. Freezing effects, a lot rarer in this game, but still another amethyst thing of locking something down so it can't ready. So I think that removal is something that every deck wants some form of it if you have access to it. Now, how much you use sort of scales with how slow you want to play the game. If you want to play, sort of an amethyst steel mid-range deck, right? Where you're trying to maybe you've got some Tinkerbells and stuff in there at the top end, right? Okay, that's awesome. But maybe you want to play it more as an aggro deck. It's still good to have a few tools in there, right? You may not run a full complement of steel removal songs, but you might run, just one. Just maybe you're just running some Fire the Cannons because they're cheap and they just can do a little bit of spot removal, right? Now, Disruption is a little bit different, and I think that Disruption tends to be more specific to what you can expect to see in the metagame, but there are some Disruption cards that are just totally ubiquitous, auto-includes, in their colors. Disruption is often discard effects, and sometimes it's just blanket force the opponent to discard a card. Sometimes it's things like Ursula, which I don't think I've seen a green deck without Ursula since it's come out. At least not a serious one.
Or Bare Necessities, where you get to pick.
Right. These are targeted. They're looking for specific things and trying to surgically remove them before your opponent can mess with them. You can do things like cards that have a can't do X effect. Pete, your opponent can't play actions next turn, right? There are cards that say, make it so that characters can't be challenged or can't challenge next turn. Like the John Silver Ship's Cook targets a card and says it can't challenge. Well, that's disrupting what your opponent was hoping to do. Then there's also debuffs, things that give minus X stats for the following turn or hand out reckless to things so that they have to challenge and can't quest. So these disruption tools are typically a little less powerful than removal straight up, but they're often more efficient. They often can come on characters as opposed to being, only on, action cards. Like a lot of the removal cards tend to be actions. And I think that it's just really important as you're building your deck to think, I know that what I'm doing is going to be really cool and really effective, but I can't ignore that my opponent's doing something themselves. And while I'm working on my win condition, they're working on theirs. How am I going to deal with their win condition and either stop them or at least slow them down so that I can finish what I'm trying to do? And I think every deck should have a plan for that. Even if it's not something your deck, even if it's not a strength of your deck, you should have something. And then the last thing, those are the fundamentals. Just as a recap, pick a starting point, define a win condition, build a game plan, develop consistency, and account for removal or disruption. And then just as sort of a wrap up, I kind of want to give you some pitfalls that I see a lot of people making.
Yeah. They're easy to fall into.
They are. And we've seen it all the time. Heck, sometimes we've done it ourselves, right? Sometimes it's hard to acknowledge you've got all these amazing ideas, but they probably shouldn't all go in the same deck. Right? Doing too many things will often make you bad at everything. And so there's a lot of times where you need to say, hey, this is a really cool strategy. And even though it's in the same colors, this other really cool strategy, I should probably build a separate deck for that. I should probably evaluate that separate from this deck because I can't fit discard along with this unique combo, along with, still having challengers, along with bounce effects. Like you just can't fit it all in usually. So you need to focus on something that you can be really, really good at. And if you try to do too many things, it's going to reduce the consistency of all of them. Another thing, and this is easy to do, and we all do it, and sometimes you have to do it to just get started, is building in a bubble. You look at a card and you're like, that's really cool. And you look at another card and you're like, that's really cool too. I'm going to put them in a deck and it's going to be awesome. And then you forget that the character that you're building the deck around has only 2 power. And that means it is getting completely wiped off the board by brawls and cloud kickers as soon as turn 3. So that doesn't mean you have to abandon the idea, but that context is super important. If you're relying on a card with 2 power and doesn't have ward to stick around for a while, it won't. Not in this metagame. So how do you fix that? Well, maybe that means going back to the drawing board and finding ways to give it ward. Maybe you play the 3-drop Alice in blue that can quest and give something ward. At least then it'll be around for a turn. Or if you're worried about brawls and cloud kickers, right? Maybe you're playing in Ruby, you play the 2-drop Lumiere, right? Which gives all of your other characters +1 attack, pushing that 2 attack up to a 3. So having that meta context and avoiding the trap of just imagining that your opponent won't do anything to mess with your super duper cool wombo combo, that's going to actually help you win more games, even if it's not quite as glamorous. And then I think the last thing, and this is just sort of like, I told you all the ways that you can build decks, all the things that you should be doing to build decks. And I should just also throw this out there. There is nothing wrong with net decking. There is nothing wrong with going and seeing what the most successful decks are and just playing those. Like I see a lot of new players, but even some experienced ones, turning their nose up to the idea of using the amazing crowdsource that is the internet as a resource. Like, we live in an era separate from the one I grew up in. When I grew up, like, everyone was building their own decks because there really was, the only internet resources was like, weird forum boards and stuff like that, And then eventually we got Reddit, right? But like, that wasn't for always there, but it is now. And you can pretty much bet that 90 to 95% of a metagame will be explored after a month or so of a set. And so it's okay to go and look and see what's doing well, see what's winning. And it may be, even if you don't take it card for card, at least use it as a template. No one's going to judge you for it, certainly not myself, because I often do that. Especially, comes tournament time, it's more important to me to try to win a playmat than it is to have created this amazing, unique thing. Now, if I can do both, amazing, awesome, super cool. But don't fall for the trap of, and don't let anyone else try to convince you it's not okay to net deck. That's just really important to me to get that message out there.
There's nothing wrong with playing what's good.
Certainly not.
You can always eventually, attune it to your local meta or different things like that if you're playing it at set champs. There's always, and even with the meta decks, oftentimes there's not one universally accepted best way to build it. So like the concept, there's probably 10 different ways to build Steel Song, an Amber Steel deck. So that's really popular in the meta. So like it's, you might have different numbers of different things. So there's not one universally agreed upon.
There's not. And even
you can add your own little spice in there if you want your own little spicy tech. We had a friend do that with Steel Song this past set champion. It served him great. So
there is also something to be said for like, and people need to hear this, having even just like a 3 or 4 card difference effectively makes it a different deck. Now, it may not look like a different deck every single game, but across the course of a tournament, a 4 card difference is going to have an impact.
Right.
And so I think that is something that everybody should just keep in mind, that like, even if you do net deck something from, the top pro player once Worlds happens, there's going to be times when that exact list isn't a good fit. Because if you know your local metagame, you might know, well, this deck was built to try to beat a different metagame. It might have succeeded on that day, but I might need to make adjustments to make it fit my community, my play style. And that is totally okay, and actually is something we encourage. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, all right, let's go ahead and get on out of here. I think I've droned on long enough. Hopefully that was useful to everybody. Jump in the comments. Let us know what you think. Of course, like and subscribe if you enjoyed this and want to see more Lorcana content. Next week, we'll be doing our Worlds preview and predictions. Should be a lot of fun.
We'll get into the crystal ball and deciding what's going to do well.
That's true. The hard thing is going to be picking which of the top players we think are going to win.
I know.
It'll be fun to try to.
Homework.
It'll be fun to watch Worlds and like root for somebody, like it's like you're watching football or something. So yeah, definitely check us out next week so you can enjoy that. Of course, we have all of the episodes now up on podcasting network, so on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
Wherever podcasts are streamed.
Yeah, pretty much. I'm actually still having a hard time with Amazon right now. They're bugging out. But most of the podcast places you can come and find us.
I'm just kidding. Yeah. Sorry, Amazon, don't come for me.
Oh boy. So anyways, they'll just never deliver our Prime stuff on time anymore.
Yeah, we're officially canceled by Amazon.
That's right. Thank you all so much for watching, and we will catch you on the next one. Bye.